These are your fast facts on Colossians chapter 1. First, the opening of Colossians is very positive in its tone. Rather than the strongly negative tone like we get in Galatians or some of the obvious marks of concern that mark the Corinthian and Thessalonian correspondence, Paul emphasizes three things that excite him about the Colossian church. First, looking to the past, he points out their faith in Christ Jesus. Then, looking to the present, he points out their love toward all the saints. And then third, looking toward the future, he points out the hope kept in the heavens for them. That idea of a hope kept in the heavens is language of a safety deposit box in today's vocabulary. And what is that hope that's locked away for the believers in Colossae? Colossians 1:27 indicates that Jesus himself is our hope. So, when everything else is in shambles, the Colossian believers can look to Christ and Christ alone as their source of hope in the future. Second, the first chapter of Colossians particularly emphasizes the gospel of Jesus Christ as a universal gospel, not a gospel that's limited simply to a singular geography or people group. See verses 5 and 6. The gospel that has come to you, it is bearing fruit and growing all over the world, just as it has among you since the day you heard it and came to truly appreciate God's grace. Then later in verse 23, this gospel has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven. Quite a universal claim. Just see how many times the Greek word for all or every occurs in the chapter. By using this language, Paul demonstrates that the gospel of Jesus is not just for a select group of enlightened mystics or elites, but a gospel that is for every person everywhere. The authority of Jesus is in no way limited or held captive by spirits or powers, things seen or unseen. Your third fact is that the first chapter of Colossians includes the Christ hymn of verses 15 through 20. This is a unique hymn that demonstrates Christ's relationship to the old creation and the new creation. In relation to the old creation, Christ is ruler, creator, and sustainer. In relation to the new creation, Christ is ruler, recipient, and reconciler. Fourth, the Christ hymn brings up the challenging idea of firstborn twice. Colossians 1:15 is often used by the Jehovah's Witnesses and others as a go-to verse to claim that Jesus isn't divine, but rather the first created thing. We should note three ways in which this passage doesn't say what the Jehovah's Witnesses want it to say. One, either Christ is a created thing or he isn't. Imagine you draw a line and on the one side write the phrase uncreated things, and then on the other side of the line write the phrase created things. Which side does Jesus belong on? According to Colossians 1:16, Jesus is the one who created all things. So that would put him on the uncreated things side, right? Well, that's why the Jehovah's Witnesses have, without any textual warrant, inserted the word other things into verse 16. So it would read, all other things were created by him. Number two, the word firstborn should be understood in context. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that firstborn always and only indicates timing or order. On the other hand, the context indicates that the word refers more to rank or superiority rather than time. Look down at verse 18, where it refers to Jesus as the firstborn from the dead. Now, was Jesus the first person to ever come back from the dead? No, but he was the one whose resurrection established authority over the realm and penalty of death. Thirdly, the understanding of firstborn cannot be divorced from the idea that Christ is the image of the invisible God. There in the same verse 15. Jesus is the invisible God made visible. So whatever you have to make of the meaning of firstborn, it must not exclude the reality that he is the unseen God made visible. Your fifth fact is that the chapter closes with Paul's personal testimony and includes a somewhat challenging phrase. There Paul says that he is filling up what is lacking in Christ's afflictions for his body, that is, the church. There are 5 main categories of how to understand this language, with some subcategories under most of them. First is the eschatological understanding. This understanding emphasizes the relationship between Paul's sufferings and Christ's return. The main view here is the predominant view of most scholars and commentators, and it is called the Messianic woes view. Here they believe that Paul is completing more than his fair share of the woes of the Messiah, and by that they mean the quota of sufferings of believers required prior to the Messiah's coming. The other main category is the soteriological category. The soteriological view emphasizes the relationship between Paul's sufferings and the salvation of human beings. The salvific view would say that Paul's suffering provides a superabundance of suffering, which the church can then dispense to decrease the severity of one's sufferings in purgatory. And this was the view of Aquinas, but to this day, it's not typically argued even by modern Roman Catholic theologians. The third main category of views is the Christological views. These views emphasize the relationship between Paul's sufferings and Christ's past or present sufferings. The three subcategories here are sympathetic, mimetic, and participatory. Sympathetic means that Christ still suffers alongside his church as she suffers. They would look to a verse like in Paul's conversion story where it says, "Paul, why do you persecute me?" And say because Paul was persecuting the church, he was actually persecuting Jesus. The mimetic view says that Christ's sufferings are imitated by Paul, so that Paul's followers would imitate them as well. The participatory view says that Christ's sufferings need to be performed in order to make a complete gospel presentation. The fourth category is that of ministerial suffering. These views emphasize the relationship between Paul's mission and ministry and Christ's mission and ministry within the broader mission of God. The first subset is the apostolic view that says that Paul had to fulfill a particular set of apostolic sufferings assigned to him only at his commissioning by Christ. So this would limit the application of this passage specifically to Paul. The second subset is the missional view, which says that Paul must fulfill the sufferings necessary to take the gospel to the Gentiles. And lastly, you have a number of views that I would categorize as linguistic loopholes. The first would say that Paul, when he is talking about suffering, is talking about ministerial suffering and not mediatorial sufferings. This distinction between types of suffering is hard to make from the text. The second would say that Paul is completing an ordained number of afflictions on behalf of or for the sake of Christ. Then another would redefine terms. It would say that Paul is filling up in turn the afflictions of Christ. And then lastly, some restructure the sentence and say that Paul is filling up what his flesh lacks with the sufferings of Christ. So those are the various views of what is meant by Paul's filling up what is lacking in Christ's afflictions for his body, that is the church. And those are your fast facts on chapter 1 of Colossians.